All right, Katrina, if you could unmute and if you could share your screen.
Certainly. I have had a little bit of experience doing Zoom, so I've got the share down pat nowadays.
That looks fantastic. So Katrina Johnson is an associate lecturer in the School of Access Education at CQUniversity. You teach computing skills in our STEPS enabling program. It's a very key and central part of what CQUniversity is. Your research interests involve the support and engagement of underrepresented adults in the tertiary sector and also integrating mobile technology into the classroom. And I rather suspect those can be clashing priorities. But Katrina, I'm certainly interested in the topic because I'd like to know more about this as well. So like everybody else, I'm all ears and your 15 minutes is yours.
Rightio, thank you. I will try and keep it succinct, but I do talk a lot. All right, so hi guys, welcome to my presentation. So as my heading says, I'm going to be talking about fun and games with Zoom and about introducing old-fashioned games into this whole online environment we've got. And I want to talk about how it actually changed the dynamic and engaged the students. Stimulating connections, changing that power ratio. So as we all know, back in March, COVID-19, excuse me, COVID-19 was one of the biggest challenges for many educational institutes. And that transition to a fully online environment was huge. I'm CQU, so Zoom was the video interface that we aimed for. And we did find that, that first sort of changeover, there was a few hiccups. The biggest thing I found was students don't turn their cameras on for a number of reasons, trying to save bandwidth and things like this. Some just don't like to be seen. Some are still in their pajamas. Some, of course, like to avoid talking to the group. So even if their camera was on, they wouldn't talk, or no camera, no talk meant you had no idea if they were engaged. And then there were the others who we're pretty sure just turned up and then didn't actually stay. They just left the camera, left their persona there. So this made for a really challenging environment, and engagement was the big thing that I really was sort of focused on. So I teach computing skills, and I teach this in the STEPS, Skills for Tertiary Education Preparatory Studies course. Now, my unit teaches very basic computing skills. For a bit of an idea of how basic, one of my students last year at the beginning of the class asked me, what is this one-click, two-click thing? So he didn't even know how to double click, and apparently he had trouble turning his computer on because he was pressing the wrong button. So this does give you an idea of how basic these students were. So I had the worry of them just being able to get on Zoom, being able to share screen if we needed that, chat, all the rest of these things we're taking for granted were things that were going to be massive for some of my students. So I wanted to get them involved, get them, engaging with me where possible, but also get them, comfortable in the environment. So what I will just, a bit of an ad lib onto this is part of what I teach is the basics of Microsoft. So we use Word, we teach formatting essays, formatting reports, we use PowerPoint, teaching them how to do the basics of slideshow presentations, and of course Excel with some spreadsheets. So my thought was, how can I get them learning these programs, get them engaged with them, let them see how they can be used, but also learn the skills in this process. And I fell back to the whole idea of let's play some games. I had started this in class when we were internal classes, and as a process, I actually had a monkey sparkly toy that I threw around the classroom, and it's actually still over in the office, so I had to dig this photo up from Kmart because that's where I bought it. So what happened was we had the soft toy, very soft because it was a computer class, we didn't want to smash screens, and they passed it to each other, and as they caught it, they answered a question. Now generally it was a shortcut question. I kind of started with alphabetical order, Control A, what is this? I did have students learn Control A fast and volunteer to be first, so they'd get a lolly because I also handed out lollies. So this was great. The students interacted. I had people helping each other, some looking it up and telling the others, some actually trying it. I didn't mind as if they actually, I don't think it was cheating when they were learning in the process. It was all fun. But then COVID hit. Ha! Guess what? No lollies, no monkey. How do I do this? So I kind of started looking into ideas. And the first thing that came up that everybody said is Zoom has polls. Zoom polls, let's do a Zoom poll. And I went, right, let's use Zoom. Let's use the stuff that's in Zoom, see what we can get. So I did these Zoom polls, and as you can see on the screen, I had some content. So with the formatting of an essay, what size should the paper be for an Australian academic document? You know, what is Australian? Because these are all things that they have to, you know, do in the course. It is a very skills-based course, so we very much do the skill. So how you get around the whole do the skill thing was start asking some interesting questions. Now, the polls were great because we do them as they were answering. I could see what they answered. I could share the results. It was anonymous, so there was no sort of pressure on the students. When I shared the results with them, we'd see how many answered right and wrong. I'd be able to explain why we did what we did. So A4 is Australian. That's why we use it. The A is, you know, Australian. The 4 is actually a quarter of an A1. Things like this, little things that developed their knowledge behind it all, as well as why we use these particular skills. So the Zoom polls were great, but I could not do that for 8 weeks in a row because we had knocked out 2 weeks on campus before we had to go online. So I only had 8 weeks or 9 weeks or something. So what I decided was I'd do these Zooms before each assessment. So each week an assessment was due. I ran a Zoom poll, so it really backed up and revised the content. But I had 6 more weeks once we knocked those 4 weeks out. What am I going to do with 6 weeks? And my classes aren't just a 2-hour lecture, it's 4 hours. It's lecture and tutorial. So there's, in the class situations, the students, I do a bit of a chalk and talk, but the majority of the time they're working on the content. I'm moving around, helping them as they need. This doesn't quite work in Zoom because they're too scared to share that they're dumb. If I tried the breakout rooms, I had to go, and I do have 30 students in the class. I'd try and have to go to 30 students or whatever groups. That wasn't quite working for me. So I decided to, change it up and bring that bit more dynamic, get them working on things outside of class, go back to the real flipped classroom, some lecture, some fun and games, and, you know, get their understanding happening. So I decided to really pull back to my childhood years and look up some games. So game time happened. What was a game that I could set up? Now, the other thing I wanted to do was use the programs I was teaching. I've got a background in digital media, so I could use all sorts of fancy things and create some wonderful apps and programs, but it'd be the same as what they get, you know, if they went online and looked stuff up. So I want them to see these programs in use: Word, PowerPoint, Excel. So and how can I do this? And my first concept was the old-fashioned bingo. That's pretty easy stuff. All I've got to do is have a bunch of squares with things in it, and they can play a bingo game. So we did this. I actually emailed the students the bingo Word document. I'd actually put all the shapes in behind in the header, so it's at behind, so they didn't click on it and lose, you know, track. And they just actually had the single little yellow cross you can see up there. And the concept was they used their Control-C, so they're learning Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste, and they would copy that across and then paste it. So I'd ask the question, and if they knew the answer, so they saw these shortcuts, I would say, for an example, what is find? What is the shortcut for find? So they would have to go through and find, and hopefully know, Control-F, put the cross on it. So if they knew it and they could put the cross on it. Now, I was, of course, sitting in the background with my little answer sheet, putting my own crosses in so that I knew when we had a lineup, and I could, you know, I made sure there were multiple lineups happening. Actually, I think I got 5 lineups before somebody actually won the game. The win of this game was share the screen. So we'd all stopped sharing at the beginning. They played the game. When they won, they were to pipe up and join the chat or join the thing, tell me they've won, and share their screen. So that was a bit of fun, and it was quite interesting, and they really got into it, and it really gave me the thought, hey, this is on a winner. So then we moved on, and we actually had moved on, of course, to a poll with when the assignments were due, but I had the idea, we moved on to report formatting. And what's another board game that we could twist into this? Trivial Pursuit. So Trivial Pursuit, I broke it back down a bit. I have 4 little what we call those little game pieces with the little, I'm blocked. Anyway, the 4 little pieces in it. The idea was I had questions on title page, the front matter at the beginning of the report, the body, and then the end matter. And I had a bank of questions. As they got on the colour, if they could answer the question, they got to fill in one of their little pieces in there. And anybody who filled in all 4 colours won the game. Again, it was quite interesting. Some knew things, some didn't. The dynamics was quite good fun, and they seemed to really enjoy it. Still a fairly simple thing. Again, using Word, all I did was use shapes and some text boxes, and we have this, you know, exciting looking game. Moving on, we then got to PowerPoint. Well, PowerPoint was fun. We only have 2 weeks in PowerPoint, so I only actually got to do 1 game in it. But the whole idea here, I looked at the using shortcuts, hangman style, following the Gangnam style thing. I put the little glasses on him so he looked cool. And the first, we did a few rounds of this. The first round was just going through the alphabet. If they didn't get the letter, one of the body parts got moved over. Now, part of the fun of doing this in PowerPoint is that I could actually move a body part on my screen, and what they were seeing on their screen, it just moved automatically. It looked like I actually really knew what I was doing. Again, they beat me. They beat the man, didn't have to be moved over much at all. We then moved on to make it a little bit more difficult, where we actually had a word. They had to guess the word about something to do with it, PowerPoint. And again, I think they beat me every time. So it wasn't as much of a challenge maybe, but they did enjoy the process. We went on to my favourite childhood game of Connect 4. Got a little bit more tricky here. They didn't know what the question was. It was coloured the same as the blocks. Oh, and we'd moved on to Excel by this point. So when they clicked on the block, they'd find out the question. So they couldn't just pick the easy ones. If they got it right, they could move a block. If they didn't, the next person could try. If neither got it right, we would actually blank out that block and it couldn't be joined. The first game I played with this, I actually did a test run with my daughter, and she thought gravity was still working, and she was trying to line up down the bottom, whereas I was going everywhere. So I had to explain that one in the class. Gravity doesn't need to play in this. I did a team by team game, and then we had a team versus the lecturer game. I have to say, in term 1, I beat the team. In term 2, I'd forgotten some of these shortcuts and they beat me. So it was quite good fun watching them, you know, come up and, you know, join together to beat the teacher. We then moved on to snakes and ladders. Again, the concept, answer the question. You can stay on the cell you've got to. If you don't answer, you get moved back. A bit of dynamic came in here because I used Excel and the little random function to create a dice so we could move them around. This was a very dynamic game, and actually, to tell you the truth, students who didn't know much seemed to get ladders, and students did know a lot seemed to get snakes, so it really changed the dynamic of who won. That random component really made it more exciting, so those students who weren't so good didn't have to feel that they couldn't join in. So I thought this was really quite good. And then we came to the very final week, and I decided I had to have a big finale. The most epic board game we could think of. So I looked around, and again, it's in Excel, so we're going to look at squares. I created Exopoly. Exopoly has the campus. It has our stepped units as part of the units that they can buy, and people have to pay them. It had enchants going to visit the lecturer and having to pay a fee for questions. So all my local lecturers were popped in there. And being Excel, we got to actually make the bank do all the adding up, so we didn't have to think. We'd pop a number in there, it would all add up. It'd tell us the hex fees down the bottom. They really liked this one. They enjoyed the challenge. Admittedly, Monopoly games can go for a long time. We were sort of limited. But even so, we did have a clear winner at the end when we played this one. And it was quite good. So that was term 1. In term 2, there were a few extra games. I haven't worried about pulling them in here, but I did create another The Floor is Lava game, and a find a word in Word. That was the first one, find a word in Word, which was, you know, quite simple and really good to see the stubborn ones who would really, really keep going till they found that word. Gave you an idea of what the students were going to be like. So basically, to round this up, I believe these games were a success for engaging with students. They turned up to class, and, you know, this was huge. But they didn't just turn up, they actually interacted. I had them talking on the chat. I had them talking on the microphones, joining in, answering questions. High student satisfaction. I got really positive feedback from the students as to how they enjoyed it. A much greater understanding of the content because we tied in questions about why, how, and explained it. Every game I explained how I'd made it. Every question on there I explained why the answer was what it was. So it gave a much greater understanding. Good grades. The students who turned up, they did well. Relationship building. So I have to say, students going up against a teacher does tend to build relationships. They really enjoy that aspect. And honestly, the best part of it here, they beat me at my own games, which means I did what I had to do. I taught them and they won. If they can beat me, they were doing really well. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you all for listening. How are we going for time, Michael?
Well, Katrina, it's 14 minutes, 56 seconds, if that's any gauge.
I do have a game of hangman if we want to pass the time.
You've done very well. I suspect there'll be a couple of questions which we have time for because that's very intriguing. I'm reminded that for me, as you unshare your screen, if you don't mind, Katrina, for me, it's about engaging and relationship building, and you use those words, and that resonates with me very closely. I know that somebody else has a question, but I'm going to ask it because it's occurred to me. How much time do you spend creating these games?
I get very hooked into creating anything creative, and okay, Exopoly did take a while, and I have a 22-year-old engineering student son, so he was lined up to help me work out the dynamics to make it good. But to be quite honest, a few hours, yes. Generally of an evening, I'd be sitting there going, ooh, what can I come up with? I'd make I'd 4 kids, teenage upwards. I'd make them test them with me. So there was a little bit of time, but that was the first term and those games have gone on, and I am going to keep using them even if we go back because the engagement, that relationship was great.
Yeah, clearly. All right, look, we do have time for another question. In fact, 2 questions actually I'll offer. Is there anybody with a question?
Thanks, Katrina. It's really interesting presentation, and it's also close to my role as an academic advisor at SoTT University and how we face problems of students' engagement and attendance in our workshop. So my question, have you embedded these games and stuff in your lecture or in a separate a workshop, and have you used both of them, both of these strategies? And how about the attendance before and after Zoom meeting, Zoom workshops? Is it the same with these activities? Is it good for increased students' attendance?
Yeah.
And we'll just ask Katrina to address one question. We're going to move on. So thanks for those questions.
So yes, the attendance did get better actually. As I said, I've got both a lecture and tutorial component. So there's 4 hours, 2 days. So the first day I'd have students come in because it was lecture. The second day they'd drop off because it was the works on stuff. So bringing these games into the second day, the attendance, yeah, it came up because they're like, oh, we'll come to this. This will be fun. I'll actually, do something versus, oh, I've just got to work on stuff. So it did bring the attendance up. Now I unit coordinate and teach. I brought these into my own specific individual internal class, and I shared them with all my lecturers, of course, so that if they wanted to, use them, they could. I'm not sure how many got into the idea of the games, but it was certainly shared through everyone so they could. And just to answer Michael, I will pop on the whole share a file and share those slides on here. If you
Fantastic. Like. You're very kind to us. In fact, Katrina, there'll probably be a couple of other questions that crop up. I'm going to invite one more online question, but please, people, put a question in the chat box. Katrina will have time, obviously, one ear listening and one ear replying to your question. So go right ahead and put your questions in the chat room. Is there one more for Katrina that's short?